No, I managed to bring the wrong stick, so it will be quite a challenge for you, so you have to concentrate a little bit more on the acoustic, on your senses. Actually, I don't think that we do disagree on all points. I found a number of consensus points, but what will we see? I take a pretty different approach, I would say. So, and what I should add in advance, this I had in mind to write this paper for a long time, but I never managed. So I took this as an occasion. But still, it's very, very preliminary, and it's not based on systematic empirical research. Yeah? So it's rather explorative. So to start with, everybody knows, I think, that Germany has a very strict regulation in matters of what I would call reprogenetics in short, and the Embryo Protection Act that has been established in 1990 is still in place, so that's a long time for such a law. And it bans, among other things, egg donation, embryo donation, surrogate motherhood, and the destruction, that's a quote, destruction or use of a human embryo for a purpose not serving its preservation. And this clause is still in place. So, according to the Embryo Protection Act, human embryonic stem cell research is illegal in Germany. And what's also important is that the Embryo Protection Act is part of the penal law. Yeah? So it's criminal law. Transgression can be punished by imprisonment, theoretically. As far as I know, that never happened. Maybe you can correct me. So, and according to a very common narrative, the strictness of this regulation is due to two factors in the literature, Catholicism, and I won't refer to that now because I think it's overestimated. I think it's not so important. And the Nazi crimes, the Nazi past, yeah? That's a very plausible narrative to many, in particular to observers from outside of Germany, yeah, to Americans and people from Israel, for instance. I think from inside, looking from inside of Germany, it's not such a coherent narrative anymore. It's not wrong, but it's just part of the story, I would say. And I won't shed a light at the other part of the story. But there's one twist to this common Nazi past narrative. Germany has learned the lessons of the past, and so on. That's why it is so exceptional. One specific interpretation of that has been provided by Yael Hashiloni-Dolev, who says, well, it's a specific interpretation of the Holocaust in Germany that has this consequence, and that differs strongly from the Israeli interpretation. And the German one is a universalistic, saying we have learned to protect human dignity in general, and the Nazi crimes were crimes against humanity. And whereas the Israeli interpretation is the Nazi crimes were basically the Holocaust, and the Holocaust was a crime against the Jews. And the lesson we learn is that the Jews have to protect themselves. Yeah, so and that's very different from each other. And I think she has a point here. Anyway, so when the Embryo Protection Act was passed in the end of the 80s. The official rationale, the justification that has been laid down for that, explicitly refers to the concept of human dignity as laid down in Article 1 of the German Constitution, which I will read to you, that says, human dignity shall be inviolable, to respect and protect it shall be the duty of all state authorities. And what you have to know also is human dignity is not one individual rights among others. It's a status, it's the foundation for all other rights. And it must not be altered. There is no constitutional way of balancing or altering this provision. Yeah, so it's absolute. Okay, I will argue that the story of a nation that has learned the lessons from the Nazi past is not wrong. I said that already, but not the whole story. reality is much less coherent, I think. And I think that at least for the past some 10 years or so, German regulation in this field is rather characterized by a specific bifurcated structure, by double structure. And that is inscribed into the law on several occasions. Namely, a very strict deontological universalistic approach on the level of principles, and you have mentioned that already concerning the Stem Cell Act, and a pragmatic approach that allows balancing of interest on a case-to-case level at the same time. And I will term this bifurcated approach the rule and exception model. I think that characterizes German regulation today. The rule and exception model. And this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the name Carl Schmitt? Some are. Okay, great. And I think this relation of rule and exception shows a structural, not a substantial, structural analogy to the relation between norm and decision, between the legal order and the state of exception as conceptualized by Carl Schmitt, actually. So, and I think there have been by now at least 3 cultural and political conflicts in Germany in matters of reproduction and reprogenetics in the widest sense that have been settled through applying this rule and exception model. And the first one, the blueprint, so to speak, in my view, was the abortion case, the abortion compromise. And now I have to go back to the year 1976, actually. I tried to cut a long story short. So the abortion compromise, the first, the stem cell compromise was the second, and the new regulation on pre-implantation genetic diagnosis was the third case. And, okay, abortion compromise. In the beginning of the 70s, as everywhere else in the Western world, there was a huge cultural war going on in Germany, among other things, on the issue of abortion, feminist movement versus Catholics and conservative parties at the time. The parliament had voted for a more liberal abortion law that would have allowed abortion during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. So the Constitutional Court said, no, no way, that's unconstitutional because it contradicts Article 1, human dignity, and so on. Because the court said, well, where human life exists, it enjoys human dignity. This is the universalistic interpretation of human dignity, right? So as broad as possible. And it's unconstitutional, the court said, to suspend the state's obligation to protect human dignity for a certain stage of life. Yeah? The state may not suspend this requirement. But, yeah? And then what on saying but? The court. But it said there are exceptions, there may be exceptional circumstances where it's not zumutbar, where it would be too much of a hardship for the woman not to have the possibility to abort, and these exceptional circumstances were a threat to the woman's health, rape, birth defects on the part of the child, and a general situation in need. So concerning birth defects, the background to that is that was the time, early 70s, when prenatal diagnosis was developed. Yeah, 1970, first amniocentesis in Germany, and the statutory health insurances said, okay, we're going to cover prenatal diagnosis in 1975. Yeah, so what the court did effectively was it modernized abortion law so that abortion following prenatal diagnosis could be done. Yeah, but it did not go so far, and it did not say abortion is okay because a woman cannot be forced, may not be forced to carry to term a pregnancy she doesn't want. It did not want to say that. And I think that is the origin of the rule and exception solution, if you want. So, and this outline had been incorporated into the law by the parliament that had no other choice than to follow these lines. And actually, it when it did so, it said that, it's a bit complicated, the court said the right of the fetus outranks the right of the woman. Mm-hmm. Unless these exceptional circumstances. Yeah? So, and one of the exceptional circumstances was birth defects, saying in other words, the right of the defect fetus does not outrank the woman's right. Yeah? So it made the right, the legal status contingent on is it disabled or not, to put it very harshly. Yeah? So it made a distinction here. Okay, the next, I will skip the new abortion regulation, which is essentially still based on that idea. Okay, stem cell compromise was the result, or ended a very fierce and heavy controversy. What?
Only.
Sorry.
Only.
Uli, yeah, has pointed out already. And the controversy was started by one researcher in particular who said, who announced that he wanted to import stem cell lines, embryonic stem cell lines, sorry, from Israel, out of all countries. And thereby forced the political institutions to respond. And that was in 2001. And it was in the midst of this very, very intense and broad national debate on bioethics that was termed, later on it was termed the bioethics debate, yeah, which was really very, a very broad civil society debate. So it was a very extremely controversial topic, embryonic stem cell research, not stem cell research in general. And the parliament this time set up a law which was a compromise saying exactly what Uli said already. Import and use of embryonic stem cells is prohibited. Next paragraph or next sentence, it's not prohibited, it's permissive under, again, exceptional circumstances. Yeah? And these exceptional circumstances were the lines are imported from countries where derivation is legal. They had been derived prior to January 2002. That has been changed by now, has been postponed. And then 3 more requirements, which were termed ethical requirements. And these 3 ethical requirements were that the respective research project had to pursue objectives of superior interest, that prior studies on animal cells had been done, and that the use of embryonic stem cells is actually required. And it established the Central Ethics Commission on stem cell research, and the function of that commission was to check have these 3 requirements been met. So it essentially decided upon the exception. Yeah? And scientists form the majority, have to form the majority in that ethics commission. Okay, very briefly, the same, and there are by now, 68 groups exceptionally conducting human embryonic stem cell research in Germany. 90 applications have been, 98 licenses have been approved. So the exception, I think one can say, has become the rule. 1 minute. Okay, and in pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, basically the same structure. Yeah, it's forbidden, but it's allowed if there is this and that hardship. Let's establish some ethics commissions, and the ethics commission decide are these exceptional circumstances given or not? Should the norm apply or should the exception apply? Yeah? So, and I think the function of ethics here is basically not to check whether certain ethical norms and standards are met, but on the contrary, whether they can be suspended in that case. Yeah? And so these are public bodies, but unlike other public ethics bodies, like the German Ethics Council, for instance, they are authorized to make decisions. Yeah? Normally national ethics bodies just give policy advice. So they do make decisions on a case-to-case basis, deciding upon the exception and thereby suspending a norm which as such is not abolished. It's still there. Yeah, it's just suspended in this case. And this, well, I can't, don't have the time to explain that. This is exactly the position of the sovereign in Carl Schmitt. The sovereign saying, I have to suspend the constitution or part of that in order to save the state, law and order. I suspend certain rights for certain groups and set up a camp, for instance, like Guantanamo, that would be an example for that, in order for the state to defend itself. Yeah? And so this decision, ethics has, in this logic, adopted that position of deciding upon the exception. Okay, sorry.